Larry Linville. Originally, I'm from Indiana, but I left there when I was 17 to enter the Army when I graduated from high school. And the Army took me to Germany where I served 3 years in the U.S. Army Highway Patrol. And when I got out of the Highway Patrol, I returned to Indiana, took the civil service exams, and wound up on the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. I look back on it today and I can remember segregated uh, lunch counters in Washington, D.C., and many people say, oh, that never happened, but it did. There were lunch counters on 7th Street, some on F Street that were segregated. In this March on Washington, that was coming at a time when everything was not integrated in Washington. Hell, our police department was not fully integrated at that time. We were a black and white police department that had scout cars that were not integrated. We had roll calls that the black police officers sat in one part of the roll call room and the whites sat in another part. It took several years that I was on the department before that changed. We had very few blacks that were in command positions. My lieutenant was one of very few blacks that were officials. He was the first black that had been promoted to that position, and he had been many years working up to that position. And he became an assistant chief of police. He had a lot to do with this Dr. King's march on Washington. Great man, Owen W. Davis. But when they told us that there was going to be a big march, I don't think anyone immediately thought about a big disturbance. They told us that there was going to be a group of people coming, and from the concern of our officials that were telling us about demonstrators coming, when I mentioned that they were talking about agitators, anytime we had a group of people in Washington, we had counter demonstrators always. In Arlington, Virginia, there was the American Nazi Party headquartered. George Lincoln Rockwell had an encampment in Arlington, and he had a group of followers that always managed, anytime there was anything that approached civil rights or any type of a group that way, whether it was a group protesting race, religion, or whatever, they would always show up and provide a counter protest. Police department role was to try to promote peaceful demonstration and keep groups separated. People could protest, they could carry picket signs provided they met certain requirements. They had to have permits. They could move in certain directions. They could do certain things as long as they met requirements. People always tried to agitate the others. Anytime you got a group of people that would arrive in trucks and buses wearing Nazi uniforms, wearing SWAT stickers, it always infuriated people. It infuriated black Americans. It infuriated Jewish Americans. There were a lot of people, and still are, survivors of the concentration camps, people that see the SWAT stickers that remember. You hear a lot of never forget. And people get tense, they get challenged, they want to rush in, they want to rip off the SWAT sticker, not realizing that these guys, that's what they are hoping to provoke. They want their moment of fame in front of the cameras, and they want to provoke trouble. So we, as police officers, knew that that was going to be a problem. And we had that. We had that in just about every demonstration we had in Washington. When we were told about the March on Washington, and as the subsequent weeks came, we were heard that different groups were going to be participating, the various groups that would be supporting the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, and we started hearing about how many buses were being chartered and trains and all that. And the police department was trying to coordinate with a lot of other intelligence groups, and no one was really telling the low-level policemen all this, just that there were going to be thousands and thousands of people and traffic was going to be rerouted and everybody was going to be working. But we knew there was going to be crowds, probably larger crowds than most of us had ever seen. I think anxiety would probably be the best vibe. I don't think there was any fear. I think it was more anxiety and perhaps worry. I tend to use the word Angst from German a lot. You know, you don't know what's going to happen, so there's always this anxiety of concern, but there wasn't a real problem. We didn't have the trouble. There was, traffic problems. There was problems with logistics of where do you put 10,000 buses? Where do you put all these people? How do you get rid of the traffic? How do you move people around? And there's a lot of logistics that I never would have thought of as a young police officer. How do you provide comfort stations for all these people? What do you do for first aid? And these are things that I'm sure our command officials had to worry about. Young police officer and low-ranking police officers, we were never told too much about it. We were just given, you'll be here and at what time and what to bring with you. And that was pretty much it. They wanted us to keep the peace. They had police officers closely spaced intervals along Constitution Avenue. That's where I was at. The group was to meet at the area of the Washington Monument. We were supposed to march from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. The leaders were in meeting with members of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they were going to join the march, and the march was supposed to go off on time, but the leaders, as I understand it, didn't make it to the march, and the march started without them, and it was a little bit of chaos as it started, but the march took off and was fairly peaceful, but a lot of crowds of people crowding the lines from both sides trying to see the marcher. Like a lot of police work, when you're assigned to a small area like that, it's kind of boring for the biggest part because you're out there and you're responsible for just a very, very small area until the crowd gets there and there's somebody to interact with. You're pretty much stuck in one area. Saw a big sigh of relief when the thing ended and there were no more people injured than there were from, people fainting, the heat strokes, things of that nature.
Were you able to not partake because you wouldn't have been there, but to hear what was going on down at the Lincoln Memorial?
Not at all. Too far away.
So when someone says to you, what are your memories of the day as it relates to the march, you really don't
have memories until I didn't know what was said or done until I had a chance to see it on TV.
So you got home, turned on the TV, and what did you see? Crowds
and the speakers and the people trying to crowd up to be next to the man at the microphone. There was nothing on the part of, this was history. We were part of something, It was. It wasn't until years later that this began to sink in, that we had been a part of something. I know I received an education on the streets. It opened my eyes to a lot of things. It not so much the march, but just being a policeman on the streets.
How so?
My footbeat was in a predominantly all-black neighborhood, and I made some very good friends on that beat. And I can remember a lady that I used to stop by and talk to that the summertime she'd make some lemonade, we'd drink lemonade, and the wintertime we'd have tea together once in a while. And she was a pretty nice person, and we'd talk, and she says, but the thing of it is, when your day is over and your shift is over, you go home and you're going back to your lily white area. And she says, I'm still living here. And she says, you're going back to your lily white area. And I'm still here. And it's different. And it was. It was. And I learned that there's a big difference. And I'm just very, very thankful that my parents had raised me to think a little bit differently. I mean, even though I grew up in a predominantly white area, my parents raised me not to think to judge people by color. My dad always said, judge people by who they are and what they do, not by the color of their skin. And I tried to remember that, and I got to realizing that, that's the way I tried to police.